Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on serialization and managing exceptions. My name is CJ Greer. I'm from Jekson, USA, and I'll be your presenter today. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join me. This webinar aims to make us think about where we are and what gaps there may be so that we can be DSCSA compliant in our serialization communication. A little bit about Jekson USA. Jekson USA has been in North Carolina for about 5 years, a little over 5 years actually. We've been planning and building the next generation track and trace and product inspection solutions. Outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, our Youngsville facility is our base where we design, manufacture, and support North America and beyond. Serialization to me is managing the data of the lowest sellable unit from the label created to carry this unique code while supporting all track and trace events. Now think of the process from encoding the label and aggregating to create that parent-child relationship during the packaging process, all while being able to query, recall, and remove illegitimate products to protect consumers and reduce counterfeit-related financial losses. For serialization, one of the initial requirements to be successful is that the site has an SME to champion and support all the stakeholders, whoever they may be. Next, SOPs detail the steps and processes to support all the workflows to package, serialize, and ship each product. These SOPs should be robust, covering all E2E or end-to-end processes that follow DSCSA guidelines and how to handle exceptions. By all partners involved in your transaction communications. The simplest mistake can prevent an electronic file from being accepted and processed as expected. The site SME would verify all data for format and accuracy. Next, did you get what was sent as expected? Does your site have a process for vetting the end-to-end workflow? This is important to ensure that each endpoint receives the expected data. In your master data, you're going to have product specifics, location specifics, and IT specifics. So with this, you'll have your global trade identification number, your G10s, your SGLNs, and all the required endpoints to create that transaction event. Some of the exceptions that you can run into within the exceptions scenarios is bad or missing data, incomplete end-to-end validation, data matrix 2D issues, timestamp disparities, and mismatched delivery numbers. One of the exceptions you can run into for the 2D is missing group separator. Module sizes may be too small. The 2D may be too small. You may have print quality issues and missing application identifiers. Some of the timestamp disparities I've experienced in the past is that during the reworking of packages on the product line, we had a parent-child where the child carton was removed, and then we reprinted a new carton and placed it back in the same shipper. With that, the carton was newer than the shipper commissioning and aggregation event, and with that, we had a timestamp disparity. Where can some of the exceptions occur? Some of the exceptions can occur where the epoch is missing data, created an error where it could not be consumed into the electronic receiving application. Another exception could be the different or same PO assigned in the shipment event. Another exception could be is missing EPIC's physical shipment sent without a timely EPICS transmission. What happens here is that the physical product was shipped out and then there was a missing EPICS file. With that missing EPICS file, what you run into is a disparity there where you have a suspect product showing up at your doorstep and you don't have the supporting electronic file to perform that reconciliation. Another exception that could occur is out of sync batch EPICS after the shipment event. Once the product is shipped on your side, if you send the shipment file too early, once you send the batch report, then you'll have the serial numbers and the product is already received, and then that will create a disparity as well. Other exceptions can be damaged products and missing products. So can we reduce exception occurrences? One of the ways that we can do this is by validating the end-to-end connections. So with this, what I would recommend, is test all of your connections in a mirrored QA non-production environment that mirrors the production environment. This is to verify your product, your master data, all the credentials in your endpoints, and EPICS product and shipment events. Communication is key to review the correctness of this interoperability. In those examples is that when you're looking at end-to-end processing, you want to make sure that all of your serial codes, you can receive them from your receiving partner. And then with that, you're able to create a batch. Once that batch has been created, from there, you perform your QA reconciliation where you want to perform the physical against your electronic file. And this is all before you send the batch information to your client. This is one of the ways to help mitigate some of the exceptions that you might run into. Next, you want to test sending that EPICS file to your client with either a simulated or the physical product arriving. From there, your client's going to receive the physical product with a waiting electronic file. In that electronic file, it's going to match 100% your physical against your electronic. Once that happens, one of the key tests in the end-to-end testing, it doesn't end there. So once you have that, you may have a client that will send the product on to a different location, making sure and ensuring that the master data is correct and available in that EPICS file and in that specific shipment event. You want to make sure that the GLNs and the SGLNs are configured as expected so that you don't end up missing a shipment event. So we need to get proactive and let's think mitigation. Some of the mitigation recommendations is that whenever you receive product through inference, you can actually have security seals on shippers to support the physical verification against the EPICS reconciliation. When you have that, any product that may be missing or damaged or not labeled correctly, you can see that this security seal, if it's sealed properly, that is good product against your electronic report. The next thing about mitigation is making sure that you understand that your validation protocols and your SOPs are kind of like living documents, so they're constantly being reviewed for gaps. Any type of exception that you may run into, you want to look at going back into the validation protocol to see if you've missed anything and look for those scenarios that may cause the future exceptions. Once you understand what those exceptions are, then you can plan for and work with all of the stakeholders to be able to mitigate these issues. And then again, understanding the workflow between all of your partners. One of the workflows is, again, what I shared earlier is the batch reconciliation sending your batch file to your client and verifying that you have a physical and a proper EPICS reconciliation. With that, your GLN, your SGLNs, and all of the transaction data are available. Another mitigation is making sure that you have the proper EPICS alerts. So whenever you send those files in your system, you should be looking for either verifiers that the tags are missing or the product cannot be verified or identified properly. If that's the case, this product should be treated as suspect product. And then another alert is from an example that we ran into, is that missing EPICS report. So without that EPICS, you can't really perform your shipment file. I've ran into scenarios where the client did not get a EPICS alert and then they were unable to perform their shipment event. So it's very important to get these alerts from your provider and to ensure that you don't go any period of time that you can't verify that your products are shipped. So another alert is the missing EPICS. Another scenario that I ran into is that there was a timeout issue with the size of the EPICS files. Depending on your batch sizes, depending on the actual file itself, you might want to check your EPICS size limitation. One of the processes that we were able to incorporate is that we can split the file to reduce the EPICS files with the commissioning timestamps and associated at the production line, for the respective packaging levels. So we can either split the file or we can combine those commissioning events for all of those serial codes at the end of the batch. That's all we have for today. The main goal is to understand that communication is key with all of your stakeholders. And from there, I'm opening up the floor to any questions and answers for Q&A.
Thank you, CJ. That's a nice presentation. And I have just a couple of questions. Like when you said mismatch and delivery numbers, can you give an example of that and how it was rectified? Next, when you another thing about the QA environment, verification of the including QA environment. Can you explain it a little bit more? And the third one is the EPSIS file size. What is the largest batch size that we can go without facing the issue of missing the file, EPSIS file?
Okay, so the first question I heard is the delivery number.
Mismatch delivery
Okay,
numbers. Yeah.
yeah, the mismatched delivery numbers. Okay, and then to make sure I understand you correctly is that you want a little bit more information about the end-to-end testing in the QA environment.
Right. Yes.
Okay, and then the EPICS file size limitation. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
the first thing about the delivery number is that your receiving partner typically handles that chain of custody. With that chain of custody, they're going to provide a delivery number, and whether it's either manually entered into your system or it comes through an ERP, it's very important that they're looking for that tag. Because once you send that physical product, so product is moved from your warehouse to the actual truck, okay, that is your chain of custody. Once it gets on the truck, then that EPICS file can be triggered at that time. If that
Right.
delivery number for that batch information doesn't match the product that's being shipped, it can throw an exception. So with that, they will not be able to receive the file. And so now the truck is on its way. It shows up at the dock, but the EPICS file has been rejected. So either that file has to either be a void shipment and or you have to repair that file on your site, add in the correct delivery number, and then update it from your side, then
All right.
resubmitting. So that's what we want to make sure is that understanding is where that delivery number comes from in the whether it's a portal or whether it's through a PO process or whether it's through an email chain.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Now it
So
makes sense. Thank
now
you,
the
CJ.
next question is the QA environment. So ideally, what's recommended and what we recommend here at Jekson is that you have a QA environment that's a mirror of your production environment. And with that, you're going to have all of the same master data, the endpoints pointing to your QA versus your production. And the reason we're having a QA environment is that you do not want to mix production serial codes and QA serial codes. So this
Right.
way it gives you an opportunity to vet out and ensure that those end-to-end connections are working. So whether it be your SOAP request, making sure that the serial numbers come in, as well as whenever you are creating the batch and looking at the package ratios versus the pack levels and making sure that the correct G10s and the SSCCs are generated as expected. Once that's
So,
all been, yes, sir.
sorry to interrupt you, but
Mhm.
uh, so when we say, is it after the batch is executed, I do this QA check, or at the validation level, I do this, or is it an in process? That I wanted to
Well,
have more clarity.
for me it's end to end because I'm describing of the whole process. So whenever you have that relationship with whoever it is, that partner,
Hmm.
you may have a different L4 provider. So you
Right.
want to ensure that you're bringing in those serial codes from that test environment, and
So
then
right
you're
now,
able to, yeah.
sorry again. So right
No, this
now,
is great.
yeah, so my L1 to L4 is, say, I have resource and retract, right? And then my
Hmm.
L5 is something else. Maybe I have like trace link. My L5 is trace link. So in that case, like, and my L4 is one, say with
Hmm.
Jekson. So how do I verify the batch in QA environment? I just I just wanted to connect the physical work that I do, and again, what am I doing in QA environment? Because in production environment, I am generating the codes, I am packing the shippers, I am then doing until the pellet level. I am aggregating everything, and then next comes what? During QA, again, I have to open them and then check, or I'm just verifying just the electronic data only. So, or am I redoing the package, opening and verifying something?
Well, this is just like, say, validating a line. Like you described, you have the L1 through L4.
Right,
So once you validate that line, then
right,
from there, you have your first product or your first partner connection. So you
right.
may be bringing on, so at that point in time, you would perform like a QA environment end-to-end testing from there. So you're making sure that you can connect to TraceLink through all the
Okay,
endpoints that are assigned in the master data.
okay, okay. It's not batch specific. It's the
Well,
client.
it not batch specific, but it simulates the full process. And that's what I recommend to everyone is to go through that full process. It helps
Right,
you fill in the gaps and make sure there's not something happening because I can try to think of a scenario is that you just assume that you have the um, pack ratio in the right G10s from, say,
right,
carton, bundle to shipper, but
right.
then whenever you package it, it's something different or not expected. You might be
Um,
missing a PO number that comes through the ERP system. So if you run it through the QA environment and you can run that QA on your package line, just like you're simulating a full production run.
yeah.
So that
Okay.
way, that's true end-to-end testing. And
Got
if you
good.
don't have that available, you can actually set up a sandbox and create those, simulations of a packaging. If you're confident in your validated line, you can actually create those package events and then just send a file from that point on.
Okay.
And then I guess the last question is the about the epochs file size. Um, I'm not seeing any issues with 75 meg to 100 meg, but again, it's not dependent on what we can send. It's the receiving. If it's a shared portal, you may have timeout considerations because you don't want one system to be hogging and sending a file, a large file like that. You might have multiple carriers. So what we've been able to do is to split those files up with those
Got it.
exceptions of clients that can't handle a larger file size because they're a
Got
shared application.
got it,
So
CJ. Uh,
all great questions.
yeah. Thank you so much, CJ.
So this was my first webinar, so please forgive my,
No,
nervousness. So,
no, no. You were great. So
um,
yeah.
and I
Thank you.
invite any other questions. Do we have any questions? Let me click on the page here. So here's the first question. How can pharmaceutical companies use serialization data to optimize operations and boost ROI beyond just meeting regulatory requirements? So let's just digest that. So how can pharmaceutical companies use serialization data to optimize operations and boost ROI? Well, with the serialization data, from what I can see right off the get, is that you have commissioning events. So you have like a timing mechanism built into your serialized data. So you can actually use that data, the timing, to actually look at your throughput. So with that, you can incorporate an OEE that can look for blockages or downtime at specific points throughout the packaging process. If you see a bottleneck or you see excessive rejects in that batch, okay, so I'm gonna segue. So if you see excessive rejects, that'll help you understand maybe you can either create efficiencies there or you can build into your application, additional lines or more capacity. And then segueing off of that, another train of thought with that serialization data is, I've kind of lost my train of thought there for a second, is being able to take the serialized data. So we've got roadblocks, timestamps there. You can create the OEE. So it just supports your OEE information as well. Okay, now I know where I was going with this. Sorry about that. Lots going on in my mind here. So at the batch reconciliation, you can actually look at where the timestamps are for the actual defects. If you've got excessive rejects in one area, you can take that data and focus on the time of what was happening. So it could be like where you can review a camera and see what was happening in that area. And then you can see if it's an operator issue. So that serialized data, you have a timestamp. And if you're on a production floor, you can actually take that timestamp and associate it to an area in that production line. And now once you have that information, you can see what's going on. Another example I can think of is that I had excessive rejects of a bottle on a production line. And we were getting known good product out of the labeler, but when it was being associated, what we found is we were getting probably bundles and cases of rejected bottles, no reads on the 2D data matrix. And what we found out is that serialized data and following the guidelines is that the module size was too small. Even though that one camera on the labeler, because it was right on top of the bottle, it could see the 2D data matrix. And this goes right back to the decodability, is making sure that you're following all of the guidelines recommended by GS1 and the DSCSA reporting requirements. But with that, we were able to increase the barcode size, the 2D data matrix, and then we were able to recover those products and reduce, the reject rates. So that's, hopefully that answers, part of your questions there for that. All right. So can you share some details about timestamp exceptions? So with the timestamp exceptions, what happens is that you may have a rework event, whether it's on the production line while the batch is being processed, or in a warehouse, you're looking for an L3 or an L4 that can support reworking product. and it has those pretty much like a firewall or an interlock in place that if you, or a rule set is what I'll call it, is that if you rework anything from a parent container, that parent container, the children being removed from that parent container, it will have to have a new parent labeled once the rework is complete. So now you have a commissioning event, a new aggregation event, that you don't have that time sync disparity. Because what I've seen in most systems is that if you have that, or another example is we had a piece of equipment at another site, the CMOS battery was degraded. And so the time server was not correct, or the time was off probably by about 4 minutes. And because of the aggregation event and the speed of the line, those products, that bundle to shipper was out of sync because it was the commissioning was after the, I'm sorry. So I think it was the commissioning event was after the aggregation event. So I think it was too fast in time, if I recall. So, but that was another example of a timestamp disparity. And what I've seen in most systems, I mean, it can be turned off, but I recommend having it turned on, that the files will be rejected. So hopefully that answers your question there. I like the anonymous questions, but I like Rufus and in the feedback that we can go back and forth. So, so the next one is organizationally. How do you typically see the SME for serialization situated? For example, is this typically, in your experience, an IT function, a supply chain, or something else entirely? Um, so the way I can answer that question is how I cut my teeth from my experiences. Um, I learned I started out and I knew the production line, okay, and how everything was packaged. And so I was able to work with the printers and understand the layout requirements. So that's the first thing about, you know, serialization is understanding the layout, the tokens that are required, and being able to manipulate that layout. From there, you roll into a quality environment, and so you have to have respect with validation and quality. So I see a serialization SME, they understand and they're the liaison between quality validation and the production management. So with that skill set, I would separate the SME outside of the manufacturing world or the manufacturing production line because of what they bring to the table. So I think they wear multiple hats. I think it would be close to either, I would side with an IT function, either that or an automation engineer function, usually in that role, because again they work with all the different, because you got to understand the graphics department from a layout standpoint, you've got to understand the production line, you've got to understand all of the rules, DSCSA, the module size from a GS1 2D data matrix, for example, for decodability down the line. So I see multiple hats being worn by this person. So, and then they interface with the warehouse department, because from there they help with the exceptions. They're the go-to whenever you have a Kaizen or some type of issue where the SME is brought in, they have to connect all the dots for you in being able to use what I mentioned earlier about the serialized data, is that you have missing product or whatever, you have missing serial codes, you can actually look for theft on a production line. So I can actually bounce back to that original question. And that SME will be that person that can be, so they're an investigator on top of that. So QA investigator. So I'll leave it at that. So it's definitely something different entirely, in my opinion. So, all right, let's look at the next question here. Can you share some exceptions you have experienced with ship to transaction in events? That's a pretty good question. Looking at my experience with the production environment is that once you create the batch file and you send it to an L4, those workflows may not stop there. Always, I would recommend always understand the workflow where the handoff is. And then on the other side of that workflow, there may be a relationship. And I'm speaking from, like, say, a manufacturer CMO relationship, because the manufacturer would say own the serial code. The CMO, through that virtue of just representing that manufacturer to product, to manage their product, the CMO becomes that business from. And so with that, the ship to and the business from, that GLN, there may be a different workflow that's required on the backside of receiving that EPIX file that the CMO may not be privy to. So it's understanding all of those touch points for a ship to event. You may ship the file, but you're sending all of those, I guess, transaction events where, whether the business from, is it a GLN or is it an SGLN? It's, for the interoperability standpoint, you're going to have both of those that should be allowed, a GLN or an SGLN. But I have seen times where it's explicitly, it has to be an SGLN. So with that, if you don't have the proper master data, which wasn't vetted out completely, that's where you can have a ship to transaction exception. So the next one, let's see here. What type of checks can be integrated in? I guess this is what type of checks can be integrated to support the DSCSA compliance. That's a good question also. So going back to my presentation, I just touched base on having robust SOPs. With those robust SOPs, one check I would highly recommend is performing like either sampling or AQL checks for grading 2D data matrix. Because over time, when you're running batch after batch, those printers, they can wear out. And with the 2D data matrix, you can run into actual nonconformity, fixed pattern damage. So you could run into a print defect that you may not realize that's happening until it's too late. So what's recommended in your SOP is you build in those AQL checks to go in and check, and then how would you check it? So GS1 recommends using like an ISO standard. To quote, it's 15426-2, and it's the 2023 version, and that's like a barcode verifier guideline. Okay, and so that's an ISO standard, but for grading barcodes, GS1 recommends having one of those on your lines and performing AQL checks and having one. I see a lot of clients out there in the world that do not have a barcode verifier. They just take out their phone with the barcode reader and go, this is what I have. That's not really a check that would really fly under DSCSA, DSCSA standards. So building that check in with a reference to that ISO would be one of the top checks that I would put into an SOP. And even a receiving, even a 3PL, they may have one of those verifiers that they can check incoming product just to make sure that it's grading, just sampling, as well. So you have it in the manufacturer side, but there could be some checks and balances, and then maybe even make a requirement. So if you have somebody that's receiving product, make sure that whoever's sending the product is providing these checks. So we'll look at the next question. And that's it. So I have a new post here.
Yeah, that's just a follow-up to the last question about the DSCSA compliance.
Yes, so we're constantly monitoring these. So we work with the HDA and GS1. So VRS, from that aspect, we're constantly monitoring what's next. And so with that, the way our platform works is that It's web-based and it's user-centric. So we don't have multiple users sharing the same platform. So with that, if there's, depending on the markets that you support, we support North America, Russian crypto, China, European standards. So we report all of those. And so anything specific to your site, we're monitoring. And if anything comes about, we'll work closely with you to implement a risk analysis, the impact analysis, and then we'll go through that whole process, which is included with our platform. And then we'll say, here's what needs to be validated. How do you want to move forward with your change control process? And so nothing gets changed until you're aware of it and we're in complete agreement.
Wonderful. Thank you, CJ.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. I think that's about it, and I think that wraps things up. So again, thank you everybody for showing up today. I appreciate your feedback and the questions, and I look forward to, the next webinar. Maybe I'll be a little more polished next time. Thank you, everybody.